Oh, this is gonna be crazy. That was great. Alright, hello everyone and welcome today to another episode of SpraynPray1000's Verdict. I am SpraynPray1000 and today I'm going to be reviewing the console version of Diablo 3. Okay, so now, forgive me if this episode comes out a little bit faster than usual, but it's kind of late at night. I just kind of want to get this done. So let's just hop into this, shall we? So Diablo is a franchise that is basically owned and, produced by Blizzard Entertainment, also known for StarCraft and Warcraft, those kinds of franchises. And Diablo is a bit more of a dark fantasy. It's a bit more violent, a bit more gruesome than Warcraft and StarCraft. It's a bit more, I'd like to say, adult-oriented. So basically, Diablo 3 is the third in the line of Diablo games, and it takes place on a world called Sanctuary. Now, for those of you who are, long-time Diablo fans, or you've played previous Diablos, you're probably gonna, adapt to the lore better than I will, because this is my first Diablo, and I've never played one before. So this is me just looking in from the outside for the first time, and pretty much what Diablo is it has a very good story, I think. Blizzard's usual style of telling stories is excellent, complemented by very well done cutscenes. The gameplay is addictive, it's interesting, it's unique, and it's also very diverse and selective. And I'll get into all this in a little bit. And of course the soundtrack, just goes hand in hand. So pretty much all around, we have a very well done package. Now, there are some problems I feel with the game. There are some things I'd like to talk about the game, and just, there's just some things about it that I just want to kind of get out there. So first things first, the main thing about Diablo 3 is that it was released actually back in 2012, okay? Now, the last Diablo, Diablo 2, I believe, had been released for quite some time, maybe a couple years, I don't know, maybe a decade. I don't want to say decade, but pretty much it had been a long ass time since they've ever released a Diablo game. And just like with StarCraft, Blizzard came back and they decided to reveal that they were making Diablo. So Diablo 3 was released for the PC in 2012. It was record breaking. It was very well received, but it was met with some controversy. For example, the DRM policy that they implemented on it was not exactly well received, and now in 2013, later in 2012, it became a big problem and a big fiasco. Also, the auction house functionality was met with a lot of criticism, especially in places in the world where they don't like to have real world gambling, which I believe is South Korea and a couple other places. And pretty much, other than that though, Diablo 3 was very, very well received. Actually, I just looked it up. It had been 12 years since the game was released, since the old Diablo was released in 2000. And basically, the plot of Diablo 3, not going to spoil too much, but pretty much giving some context. The plot of Diablo 3, it takes place on the world of Sanctuary, sometime, I guess, after Diablo 2. And you basically are introduced at first to two characters, a very old man called Deckard Cain, and his, and I believe one of his relatives. I believe her name is it's his niece, and her name is Leia. Okay, and pretty much what happens is these two people, they get drawn into this, this happening, or what Deckard Cain refers to as the end of times, as a gigantic shooting star plummets down to earth, and the undead begin to rise around the town of New Tristram. And pretty much you, depending on what class you pick, you have your own backstory. You know, your character will talk. He talks differently. You, as the protagonist, set out to help them, and you get involved with this story of the return of, you know, all these demons that have come back to try and take over the world and, you know, basically ruin it. So, for example, there are a couple of demons coming after you that you need to kill, or not just coming after you, but basically trying to ruin the world for everybody. You know, like Demon Lords Belial and Demon Lord Asmodon, and a bunch of other minor characters. And as the protagonist, you set out to help Leia and Deckard Cain stop this. And along the way, you encounter plot twists, new characters, and a lot of epic stuff really goes down in this playthrough, or well, in the game, which is actually very, very interesting. And ultimately, there's going to be a lot of times, you know, when the story takes a turn for the worse. You know, there's going to be a lot of sad stuff. And pretty much, I have to say that the entire time, I was very captivated by the story. The story is not the weakest link in this game, without a doubt. That being said, you know, at some points, it does kind of seem to slow down a little bit, but not too much. Like, the story was very well crafted, and I enjoyed it a lot. Now, moving on to gameplay. The gameplay, on the other hand, is very interesting, very unique. It kind of builds off some of the stuff you've seen from Warcraft 3 and all the other RTS games that Blizzard has made. And now the main emphasis of the console version of the game, which is what I'm really reviewing, is by console version I mean the Xbox and PS3 version. The PS4 version is going to come out next year. You know, once the PS4 is situated, and the PC version has already been out. So pretty much the main emphasis of this game, and in fact the entire ad campaign was based around it, is that you can get friends together to help you team up and fight, you know, 4-player style against the darkness, whether it be online or offline or however you play. So unfortunately, I didn't really have the time to recruit people to buy, you know, a game that they weren't really sure, you know, they didn't know much about. So I played the game solo, and I have to say, the game plays very well solo. You know what I mean? It's not like you just get completely ambushed and ruined by, you know, all these enemies. And I'm assuming that the way the game works, you know, with multiple people, is it works similarly to Borderlands, where you can have more people in your game, but at the same time the enemies become more difficult to slay, or there's more of them, or some stipulation like that, so it's not just a pushover with 4 people. Now, the gameplay, pretty much, is that you have a character, and he has abilities. You know, he has basic attacks, and then he has attacks that use up whatever resource that he has. So for example, I played a monk. You know, as a monk I have spirit, and in order to use spirit, I use an ability, and when I use it, the spirit is gone, and in order to replenish it, I have to use basic attacks so that I constantly have a fresh source. So pretty much the monk is kind of like, you know, not really the tank like the barbarian, but the monk is really, you know, a damage dealing class. There's a lot of tricky moves like exploding palm, which if enemies are killed while under its influence, they literally explode and deal damage to nearby enemies. Or, you know, lashing kick, which is a circular kick that knocks everyone away who's around you, who's an enemy. And, you know, you have healing, you have mantras, you have, which are like auras or aspects from Warcraft. And you have a lot of cool abilities as a monk, and I just could not even believe what other kinds of abilities are in the game. Now, for the other, you know, that being said, you know, other classes have, you know, different types of ways of fighting. So, for example, I believe like the Witch Doctor is what, mana or something, and the Wizard has Arcane for his spells, but Arcane, you know, each one of these substances regenerates in a different way. So it differs depending on your playstyle, and really the whole goal is to try and pick a playstyle that you feel most comfortable with. Now, Diablo 3 is kind of more of a loot heavy game, kind of like Borderlands in that aspect. Now, in this game, you know, you're fighting monsters, you're trying to find better equipment for your guy so he does better, so he can fight new monsters, and, you know, learn new abilities and get better stats. And for the most part, I found stat building to be pretty okay. You know, I pretty much customized my character as I wanted to, as I saw fit, and it was alright. It was an enjoyable experience. That being said, there were some times, you know, especially with like crafting and with with, socketing jewels, that I said to myself, just this is not enjoyable at all. This experience is not that great. So, for example, towards the later parts of the game, I was trying to socket my gear, trying to get myself better stats, more vitality and more dexterity, because each class has its own leading attribute. So for monks it was dexterity, but I also wanted to increase my vitality, so I would have more health, so I could tank monsters and basically have a lot more stuff, and a lot more health, so I could take more damage. And it was just a very unpleasant experience trying to craft stuff, because believe me, it is very, very hard to procure enough basic essence in order to craft more gear. Each time you try to break something down, it only gives you one powder or one tooth or whatever you need, and when you try to make something, it's like 9 teeth or 9 powder required, and it's really expensive. And then ultimately, to get something that's worse, but not only stat wise but defense wise and offense wise, than what you already have on, is just a real soul crusher. It just says, well, why do I even bother? I might as well just go with the random loot the game hands out to me. And the same thing goes with gems. The problem with gems is that they never drop any gems. I turned up the difficulty and I really didn't even notice the fact that more gems and stuff were dropping, which is what was supposed to happen. I was supposed to get a bonus in that, and ultimately, you can't. It's very hard to acquire the stuff that you want to get so you can complete the game. Now, that being said, Diablo 3 is a game meant to be played multiple times with friends or whatnot. That being said, I did not have the time to play the game multiple times, because for a couple of factors. First of all, because I am very busy, with all the different things that I have, not only just the fact that I'm in college, but also the fact that I have a bunch of games I'd like to play, even just a week after that, you had Kingdom Hearts and blah, 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 blah. But the main point is that a lot of times the game gets really boring. There's a lot of down segments, a lot of World of Warcraft style fetch questing, and this is like interwoven into the main story. Now, don't get me wrong, the main story is very interesting, but it's kind of, after a certain time, a bit of time, it kind of, falls into almost a routine-like fashion, especially, with Diablo, because pretty much most of the combat is just hold your default button, do your default attack to build up your resource, at least for monks, and then push the buttons that you want, and pretty much that's it. It's pretty straightforward and cut and dry once you get into the groove of it, and it really never changes from there. So, for example, at one point, one of the boss fights completely threw me for a loop. It became sort of this three-dimensional fight. It was really amazing. It kind of reminded me of some of the stuff I'd seen in StarCraft, where, I forget what the fight was, but it was like in StarCraft Heart of the Swarm, there was this amazing fight sequence where you're like fighting, and it's almost like an action-y fight in an RTS, which is something that you would not have come to expect. So that threw me for a loop. It was a really fun fight sequence, and it was fun in Diablo too. Unfortunately, after that, the game kind of froze into like this funk from which it never returned, and in that it just never really diversified itself again. So after that one boss, nothing changed. It was kind of the same old. Bosses would just be, okay, you got to hit the boss a couple of times, build up your spirit, then attack with your spirit, basically dump all your spirit, all your damage abilities onto the boss, hit him with the ability that lets him take more damage, and just rinse and repeat. And he comes out, he does a big attack, okay, time to fall back, time to heal, or time to try and dodge. And by the way, the dodging aspect is pretty good. If you can actually dodge an attack, most likely they'll give you the dodge, and in addition to the passive dodging that your character can do. And really, I tried to build a tank style character, and you can dual wield if you want, but I ended up using a shield and one other weapon for the most of the game. But I have to say, the game kind of got really boring, as especially you have this epic fight, at the end against the Lord of Evil himself, Diablo, and it really is no different than any of the previous boss fights, besides the one I mentioned, which was in 3D and was kind of intense and kind of edge of your seat style action, and that to me is like, you have StarCraft, where every mission in StarCraft is different. It involves a different unit, using that unit, combining what you've learned from previous missions with this new unit, trying to mix it up. Each mission, like in StarCraft Heart of the Swarm, they definitely tried to diversify it a lot. They had, a mission where you're protecting Kerrigan, and, or a mission where your Kerrigan is in a duel with another superior being, and she has to try, it's like tug of war, really. You have to try and shut down the power nodes to this superior being so Kerrigan can win, and if you don't, Kerrigan dies. Here in Diablo, it's just kind of like, you go into a cave, you go loot hunting, and then, there's going to be monsters you got to kill, and pretty much the combat is generic, after a little bit, it's the same. Now, that being said, you can really diversify your abilities. You can select spirit runes to amplify your chosen abilities. You can turn on elective mode, which pretty much on the console, the problem is you only have so many buttons. You can only bind one of each category to a button. Well, with elective mode, you can choose to bind whatever you want to whatever of the 6 buttons you please. So you can have multiple of one category or none of another, or however you want it, which is good. The abilities are definitely helpful. I tried, as I said, to make a really tank-based monk. So I had like 7,000 health and whatnot, and I just had a ridiculous amount of stuff, and it was really going well for me, and I was really enjoying myself. It's just, I kind of fault the combat for being kind of boring and repetitive. And, it's not like the multiplayer style. There is no multiplayer in this game. It's a co-op game, like multiplayer in StarCraft, every match is different, everything is unique. Unfortunately in Diablo, it's kind of like, okay, you enter a room, here's 100 guys, now you just gotta stand there and kill them. And, it's kind of fun to try and see how many you can kill at once, or how many of, whatever you can pull off. But ultimately, it's kind of, around Act 3, I was kind of like, okay, let's just kind of get on with it. I was just like, now it's kind of dragging out, it's kind of boring, unfortunately. Even with all the, interesting and unique stuff, I feel that they could have diversified at least the boss fights a little more than what they actually did. Now, especially with Diablo just is like, you're standing there for so long, you just gotta avoid a couple of simple attacks, and then, you pretty much get the I win card at the end. Now, the ending and, as I said, the story are just amazing, so just don't even feel bad about that. The story is great. But the game, getting there, the gameplay, I think, could have been a bit better. Especially on the loot side and on the gameplay and the combat side. That being said, you do run into a lot of monsters that drop a lot of good loot. And I definitely was picking up loot all the way from the start to the end. Loot that I felt would be beneficial for my character. Now, the problem is that this game has a ridiculous amount of pre-order bonuses that I personally feel kind of ruin the game, okay? So, for example, I had the Infernal Helm, which is what they basically advertise nonstop about the game. I had the Infernal Helm, and I pretty much wore it through all of Act 1, through all of Act 2, and I never took it off because it gave me such ridiculous stats. It never degraded, it never needed to be repaired. It gave me 25% experience bonus. So I was there wearing it pretty much the entire first half of the game, with no problem, nothing, no skin off my back. And there was no compelling need to actually take it off. And then eventually I found something that was better, and I was like, okay, maybe I'll take the experience loss. And I did, and that was the end of that. That was the case for a lot of stuff that I got, either for pre-ordering the game or that they just give you at the beginning of the game for who knows what. And it was just kind of, confusing. Like, why would you give me a broken piece of equipment, especially at the end of the game? I was kind of doing okay against some of the monsters at the end of the game. And then I had this item, just in my inventory, Leoric's gauntlets. And, I put them on, and they increased my health by 1,000. And pretty much after that, I had no problem killing anything in the game. And all that I ended up doing really was just sitting around, holding X, and then doing what I like to call damage banking, which is literally where the enemies are banks. You have damage, you deposit your damage into the enemy like a bank. And that's pretty much hack and slash, or whatever you want to call it, general. Now, I know it's making it sound like, this game is absolutely horrible or something, and I'm going to give it a pretty bad score, but I compared it pretty much to all the other games that I played this year, and I think it's right where it belongs, in terms of the console. I think this is exactly where the game belongs. So, but I'm not done yet. Final thing I want to talk about is the graphics. And now I said the same thing about StarCraft. I'm going to say the same thing here. This game looks absolutely beautiful during the cutscenes. The cutscenes are magnificent. Even if you don't have that great of a computer, the cutscenes, well, now I'm thinking StarCraft, but the cutscenes are just extremely well done. And I think, for buying the PlayStation version, which is a little bit more graphically advanced than the Xbox 360, not by so much that I think it would make a major difference depending on what console you're going to get. But I was blown away by the realism of some of the, not realism, but by the detail and the design of some of the characters in the game. And some of the cutscenes elaborating the story, which are found usually at the end of most acts or at the beginning, were just fantastic. That being said, I think, there were a few less than I would have liked. Not so much that it impacts the score, but I know Blizzard can do amazing things when they really put their minds to it and really make an enjoyable experience. So definitely, I love the cutscenes. They always make watching or playing a Blizzard or a Blizzard game more enjoyable. It's been like that since Wrath of the Lich King. Into StarCraft 2. Really, the cutscenes really got me into it. Just look at it; it's just beautiful. Then Heart of the Swarm really blew me away, threw me for a loop. And that playthrough was really fun because I actually managed to get my computer to run it while running recording software. So they did a great job, I feel. I'm very thankful for Blizzard for bringing this game to the Xbox and PS3. Otherwise, I might not have played it. So what would I give Diablo 3? I think I should give Diablo 3 an 84 out of 100, okay? An 84 out of 100 because it does a lot of stuff right. Some stuff I feel could have been done a little bit better, but for the most part, it's a very enjoyable experience. Now, 84 out of 100 isn't a bad score by any means, especially on my scale. I know that they definitely put a lot of work into this game. The console port probably was a natural occurrence to them to try and get it to more people and make a little more money, which is kind of fun. Especially because I don't foresee like Warcraft or any of the other games really doing well on a console setting, so I'm surprised that they were actually able to pull it off with Diablo, which it's kind of good. The game plays very well. It froze on me at one point. I can't remember when or why. Oh no, I do remember. It just randomly froze. It was nothing major, and then all I had to do was reboot my PS3 and then it was fine. So very good game. I think Blizzard should be very proud of themselves. Compared to all the other games I played this year, though, I don't think this game really can excel above that. But out of the 19 other game or the 18 other games I played, this game does rank very high up. Okay, only like 8 games surpass it. So that's not bad. That's pretty good. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for listening to my review of Diablo 3. The game was very fun to play, and maybe the experience would be different if you had multiple people. I don't know how that works so well, so this is more of a single player's experience with this game, and I thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time for the next verdict. So thank you very much.